Welcome to my video, 7th graders. Over the last few classes, we've been discussing external text structures. We said that external text structures, also known as text features or external text features, are things around the text that jump out at you, things that you notice without even needing to read the text. These can include things like graphs, maps, timelines, bolded words, and so on and so forth, and they can help give you valuable information about what you are reading. Now that we're done looking at the external features of the text, it's time for us to go inside and examine what are known as internal text structures. Internal text structures deal with how the text is written and how the information is arranged inside a piece of text. In order to find the internal text structure of a piece of writing, you have to read and understand the text and how it is put together, and that takes practice. So today's notes are designed to help you determine how a piece of text is organized so that you can better understand what you read. This video will be about 16 minutes long, and you can pause or back up as many times as you like, just as long as you jot down all the important information. So grab some notes and something to write with as we learn how to dive inside a piece of writing. The first thing you'll need is a set of Cornell notes like this one. You'll want to make sure that you write your name, class, and period, and the date in the upper right-hand corner. Oh, that reminds me. Let's talk about our little friend up here. Anytime you see this little blue and red pen icon at the top of the screen, that means there's something for you to write down, in this case, your heading information. If you don't see the icon, you don't necessarily need to write anything, but you do need to listen. Speaking of writing, the next thing you'll want to write is the topic of this lesson, which will go at the top middle of the page. The topic of these notes is, of course, internal text structures, which are also known as organizational patterns. Let's go ahead and write both. Now, in addition to these Cornell notes, you'll also need a second handout that looks like this one. This is a listing of some of the different graphic organizers associated with organizational patterns. You'll want to keep this second handout right next to your notes, as we'll be switching back and forth between them throughout this video. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's take some notes. Before we begin, let's take a look at today's objective. This is something that you do not necessarily need to write down. We have two objectives that we'll be working on today. The first is we want to be able to recognize organizational patterns to enhance our comprehension. And the second is we want to be able to recognize transitional words that signal organizational patterns. Now, from those objectives, we arrive at our essential questions, and this is something you will want to write down. There are two essential questions, so give yourself enough room to write. The first question is, what are the different internal text structures? The second question is, how do you recognize the organizational pattern of a text? By the end of this video, we should be able to answer both of these essential questions. Let's quickly review external text features. We said external means outer, so external text features are things that you notice immediately when you look at the pages of a text. This could be things like illustrations, graphs, italics, bold words, headings, subheadings, sidebars, and we can go on and on. They're the things that jump out at you, and you don't have to necessarily read a text in order to find them. Internal text structures, however, are a little bit different. Internal means inside. So internal text structures are the way that ideas are organized inside of a piece of text. In order to see the internal text structure of a text, you do have to read it. If you can figure out the internal text structure of a piece of text, then it will be easier for you to understand what you're reading, which is why we study this in the first place. There are 6 different internal text structures that we'll want to be familiar with. Some of them are more common than others, but all of them are important. As we take notes on each, we'll want to write down the purpose of the text structure, an example of that text structure, and some of the signal transitional words that help us figure out which text structure is being used. Let's get started. Our first internal text structure is called compare and contrast. The purpose of something that's written to compare and contrast is to show how two topics are alike and how they are different. An example of something that's written to compare and contrast would look something like this. John and Susan are both students at Hayfield, but John is in the 7th grade and Susan is in the 8th grade. In this case, we see how John and Susan are alike and how they are different. Some of the signal transitional words that we might see in something written to compare and contrast are words like, unlike, but, on the other hand, both, also, too, in contrast, similar, difference, and although. If we see these signal words, there's a good chance that what we're reading is written to compare and contrast. Let's take a look at your other handout, the one with the graphic organizers. Usually when something is written to compare and contrast, the most common graphic organizer is a Venn diagram. So on your handout, just above the Venn diagram in the small box, I want you to write compare and contrast just above the Venn diagram. Venn diagrams generally mean compare and contrast. Our second type of internal text structure is called chronological, sequential, or process. Now, technically speaking, these are really three different types of internal text structures, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to lump all of them together because they all have something in common. Namely, they all involve steps. Hopefully the steps work out better than they did for this person. The purpose for something that is written with either of these text structures is to show the steps in a process, to show a timeline, or to show some other order of events. The important thing here is the word order. An example of something that's written chronologically or sequentially might look something like this. Before writing a draft, you should first do pre-writing. Then you can revise and edit your draft. The last step is publishing. In this example, it shows us what we should do and exactly what order we should follow. Some sample transitional words would be things like first, second, next. Dates or numbers, those definitely tell us an order. After, before, then, last, at the same time, and the words order and steps. All of these are signals that what we're looking at very well may be written in chronological, sequential, or process order. Hey, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. Come to think of it, it feels like we might have worked on something recently that falls into this category. Wait, did we talk about anything today that had to do with steps? Other than the lady falling down the escalator. Maybe earlier in class? Oh yeah, today's journal entry. This journal prompt, starting your day, was chosen because it basically forces you to write events in a specific order. Odds are that when you were writing, you used some of the signal words we just mentioned, things like first, next, then, after, etc. The important thing here is that internal text structures apply not only to what you read, but they can also apply to what you write as well. Looking back at our graphic organizer handout, our second graphic organizer is an example of what's called a sequence chart. Sequence charts let us know the order that events unfold in our piece of writing. Sequence charts are characterized by one of two things. The first is numbers that let you know which events come first, second, third, and so forth. The other is arrows that show us how each event progresses. Follow the numbers or the arrows, and you can tell in what order each event unfolds. Our third type of internal text structure is called listing or enumeration. The purpose of something written using this internal text structure is to list information or examples about a topic, and is commonly referred to as main idea and details. In other words, it gives us a main idea and then gives us details related to that main idea. An example of something written with this text structure would read something like this. My friends are always here for me. For example, they visit me when I'm homesick. They also cheer me up when I get bad grades. Most importantly, they always remember my birthday. In this example, my friends are always here for me is the main idea. Everything else that goes along with it are details and examples related to that main idea. Some signal words that go along with something that's written in listing or enumeration organizational pattern are, for example, for instance, most importantly, also, plus, or additionally. If we see these words, there's a good chance that what we're reading is written using this internal text structure. On our graphic organizer handout, an example of a graphic organizer that goes along with listing and enumeration would look something like this. It's usually going to be a web, and the details can go anywhere from the bottom to the left or right or all the way around. The important thing is the main idea is in the middle, and any details and examples are on the outside. Our next internal text structure is cause and effect. The purpose of something that's written in this internal text structure is to show the cause of an outcome, the effect of an event, or to show a problem and a solution. In other words, it shows how one thing leads to another. An example of something that's written cause and effect might be, because of global warming, the polar ice caps are beginning to melt. As a result, the sea levels are rising, with the extra water causing flooding. In this case, global warming is our cause, and the effect is the flooding. Some of the signal words connected to something that's written in cause and effect internal text structure are as follows. Because, this leads to, as a result, if, and then, and the words cause and effect. If you see these signal words, there's a good chance that what you're reading is written in cause and effect organizational pattern. To our graphic organizer handout, cause and effect graphic organizers usually look something like this, with the cause being on one side, the effect being on the other, and the arrows signifying which comes first and which comes second. Make sure on your graphic organizer that you label this box as cause and effect. The last two types of internal text structures are less common than the first four. You're not likely to find a lot of things that are written using these organizational patterns, but it is still important for you to be familiar with them. The first is called concept and definition. The purpose of something written using this internal text structure is to explain or define a topic using supporting details, and it's actually very similar to listing and enumeration. With concept and definition, though, we start off with a definition and then explain things that go along with that definition. An example would read something like this. The word Akita refers to a type of dog. An Akita is a large breed with pointed ears that originated in Japan. We would start off with a definition, just like what would come out of a dictionary, and then go on to give some of the characteristics of an Akita, which kind of looks something like that. Some of the signal words associated with this internal text structures is as follows. Refers to, is defined as, can be described as. Anything that goes along with a definition and then describes that definition in depth. Back to our graphic organizer handout. When something is written using the concept and definition organizational pattern, it's usually going to be associated with a graphic organizer known as a concept definition map. Concept definition maps look very similar to webs that we would see when we have something written using main idea and details. The concept goes in the middle, and all of the characteristics and definitions will go around the outside. Our sixth and final type of internal text structure is known as generalization/principle. The purpose of something written using this organizational pattern is to organize information into general statements with supporting details. This organizational pattern is very uncommon, and you're not likely to see many things that are written using this organizational pattern. But if you did, it would probably read something like this. My friends at Hayfield and I love McDonald's hamburgers, so all teens must love McDonald's burgers. In this case, we create a generalization and we apply it to everyone and everything associated with it. Some signal words that would go along with this type of organizational pattern might be words like all, none, every, always, and never. If we were to see a graphic organizer, it would look very similar to the concept definition map or the main idea graphic organizer, which is why this isn't on your handout. Just be familiar with what it's called because you might see something that's written using this internal text structure. Well, you guys, I'm tired of talking and you're probably tired of writing. So what do you say we end these notes? There's a spot at the bottom of your Cornell notes for a summary. Here you'll want to summarize what you've learned about internal text structures. In order to do so, let's look back at our first essential question. That question asked, what are the different types of internal text structures? Now that we know how to answer this question, let's write the answer in your summary. In a sentence or two, what are the different types of internal text structures? Look back at those notes if you need a reminder. And that concludes our lesson on internal text structures, otherwise known as organizational patterns. Don't forget to clip these notes along with the graphic organizer handout into the class notes section of your binder so that you don't lose them. This is Mr. Washington signing off with the words of the immortal Dr. Seuss. The more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. Take care, 7th graders.